Hello, I'm Wallace Henry Hartley, and I've arrived in Southampton to take up my new position on the RMS Titanic. The ship set sail on the 10th of April 1912. I am the new band leader, and I, along with the other 7 musicians, will be entertaining the passengers whilst the ship sails to New York. The Titanic is a magnificent ship, and I'm looking forward to sailing on her maiden voyage. I will, of course, miss Maria, my fiancée, but I am looking forward to seeing her when the Titanic returns to Southampton.
I was born in Colne, so I have known about Wallace Henry Hartley since I was a girl. On the 2nd of June 1878, Albion and Elizabeth Hartley were blessed with the birth of their second child, a son, whom they named Wallace Henry. Wallace was born at 92 Greenfield Hill, in Colne, Lancashire. On his birth certificate, Albion's occupation is shown as being that of a manager in a mill. Albion and Elizabeth had 6 children: Mary, Wallace, Uhtred, Elizabeth, Hilda and Conrad. Sadly, both of the 2 younger boys died in infancy. Later in 1890, the family moved to 90 Albert Road. At that time, this area of Colne was known as the West End. There is a blue plaque on the outside of the house. A blue plaque is a sign that commemorates the life of a notable person, an event or a building in a public place here in the UK. The family were regular attendees of the Bethel Independent Methodist Church, where Albion Hartley was the choir master there for over 25 years. Wallace and his family were all members of the choir. It is said that it was Albion Hartley who introduced the hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee," to the congregation, so that is how Wallace grew up with and became fond of the hymn. Wallace attended George Street Wesleyan Day School, and it is there that he was introduced to the violin. By the time that he was 14 years of age, he was performing violin solos at tea parties and various other functions. He earned the reputation of being a gifted player after he joined the Colne Orchestral Society. Upon leaving school at the age of 14, Wallace went to work as a clerk at the Craven and Union Bank in the town centre of Colne. However, he had aspirations of becoming a professional musician. In February 1895, the family moved to 35 Somerset Road, Almondbury, Huddersfield, but they still had links with Colne. In November 1895, the Bethel Church in Colne held a grand concert to celebrate the installation of a new pianoforte. Wallace and his sister Mary took part as artistes in the concert. On the concert program, Mary was billed as a soprano and Wallace as the solo violin. He was 17 years of age. Following the move over into Yorkshire, Wallace joined the Huddersfield Philharmonic Orchestra. By 1898, he had achieved his dream of becoming a professional musician. He played with various bands and companies such as the Royal Carl Rosa Opera and Julian Kant's Austrian Blue Band. The family had moved again to Leeds, so following his 2-year spell in Bridlington with the Municipal Orchestra, Wallace went back to live with his parents. He took up a position at Collinson's Cafe in King Edward Street, Leeds. It is said that he probably met his fiancée Maria Robinson at Collinson's. In 1908, the family moved to Surrey Side, West Park Street, Dewsbury. Within a short period, Wallace had taken up a position with the Cunard Line on the RMS Lucania. Then transferred as second violin on the RMS Lusitania, then as bandmaster on the RMS Mauretania. Having previously completed 80 transatlantic crossings, Wallace arrived back into Liverpool on the Mauretania on the 9th of April 1912. The Black brothers, who were now the agents for any musicians that wanted to work on the shipping lines, offered Wallace a proposition to transfer to the Titanic as bandmaster. He liked working on the Mauretania and he'd only recently proposed to his fiancée, Maria Robinson, but it was an honor to be asked to be the bandmaster on the largest ship in the world. Needless to say, he somewhat reluctantly agreed. Wallace arrived in Southampton on the morning of Wednesday the 10th of April 1912, and along with the other bandsmen boarded the Titanic as second-class passengers on ticket number 250654. When the first-class boat train was due to arrive, the musicians greeted the passengers with music. The RMS Titanic set sail from Southampton at 12 noon, on what would later become an ill-fated journey. The crossings across the North Atlantic was going well, until the Titanic collided with an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on the 14th of April 1912. Due to the damage sustained, the Titanic was now flooding with water, so Captain Smith gave the order to uncover the lifeboats and muster the passengers. However, there was only the capacity for about 50% of the people on board. At 12:15 a.m. the band started to play in the first-class lounge. Pierre Marekel, a survivor from first class, later stated that the band had received an order to play continuously, in order to calm the passengers. Survivor accounts have reported that the band was seen playing up by the foyer on the boat deck, where the passengers were being mustered. There are conflicting accounts with regards to exactly what tunes were played. However, the hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee," was reported as being the last piece of music that was played. Sadly, at 2:20 a.m. on the 15th of April 1912, the Titanic sank into the dark depths of the North Atlantic Ocean. Wallace, the other 7 members of the band, and the remaining passengers and crew all perished. The CS Mackay Bennett recovered his body on the 28th of April 1912. Wallace was able to be identified from the contents of his pockets, and his violin case that was strapped to his chest. The Mackay Bennett arrived in Halifax on the 30th of April. Arrangements were made for Wallace's body to be repatriated back to England, on the White Star liner Arabic. The Arabic docked in Liverpool on the morning of the 17th of May 1912. Albion Hartley, together with a funeral hearse, were waiting the arrival of his son. Albion officially identified the body of his son. Then the horse-drawn hearse began the 60-mile journey back to Colne. The journey took 6 hours, and the hearse finally arrived at the Bethel Chapel in Colne at 1 a.m. on the 18th of May. The coffin then remained in the chapel until after the funeral service later that day. The funeral service for Wallace Henry Hartley commenced at 1 p.m. on the 18th of May 1912. Even though the Bethel Chapel only had a capacity for 700, a congregation of 1,000 people attended the service. In the front pew sat his parents, siblings and Maria Robinson, his fiancée. The service began with music by Mendelssohn, followed by hymns and prayers. Mr. Thomas Worthington, an independent Methodist preacher, gave the address. Throughout the service, the family were naturally overcome with emotion. Towards the end of the service, Colne Orchestral Society played "Nearer My God to Thee," but due to emotion, many people in the congregation were unable to continue singing the hymn. Once the service was over, a procession was forming outside the chapel. There were bands from various neighbouring towns, the 5th Battalion of the East Lancashire Regiment, along with buglers, scouts, and representatives of various organisations. The coffin was carried out of the Bethel Chapel by 12 pallbearers, 8 of whom were Wallace's cousins, and placed on the horse-drawn hearse. The bands began to play the Death March in Saul, and continued to play this all the way to the cemetery. At the head of the procession were 4 mounted police, followed by 30 policemen on foot and all the bands. Walking behind the bands was the Mayor of Colne and members of the Town Council. Mr. Worthington and Mr. Black, from the music agency in Liverpool, followed. Then came the hearse, which was followed by a landau full of flowers. In the next carriage rode Wallace's parents and his 2 younger sisters. The carriage with Maria Robinson, together with Mary's family, came next. 6 other carriages containing various relatives followed. At the very rear of the procession was the mayoress. All along the route, curtains were drawn, and over 30,000 people lined the streets, paying their respects, with the men doffing their hats as the hearse passed by. Colne had never witnessed such a scene before and hasn't witnessed one since. The procession took an hour to reach the cemetery. Upon arrival at the cemetery, the procession moved down the steep hillside. A cordon of police and bandsmen were formed around the grave, the last rites were given, and as the coffin was lowered into the ground, the Bethel choir sang Nearer My God to Thee. Scout buglers closed the ceremony by playing the last post.